You're listening to the Just Japan podcast. Everything you want to know about Japan.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Just Japan podcast. Everything you want to know about Japan. My name's Kevin O'Shea. I am your host. Welcome to episode 233 of the Just Japan podcast. And this episode, I'm going to be chatting with a fantastic Kyoto-based travel guide, writer, musician, someone who does a lot of cool things. Phillip Jackson, and I'm really happy to have Phillip Jackson for the very first time on the Just Japan podcast. If you're someone who's listened to some of my other shows, you may have heard Phillip before. Phillip has been a guest a couple of times on the Supernatural Japan podcast, as well as the former Just Asia podcast. Now, folks, I do want to let you know that the Supernatural Japan podcast is back. New episodes have just dropped last week, also this week. So go check that out wherever you listen to podcasts. If you like things Japan and you like things spooky and you like folklore, go check out the Supernatural Japan podcast. But back to talking to Phil Jackson. Phillip is a fantastic guy. He's a friend of mine. He's someone I know personally. I've met him personally. He's a great guy. He has written the Hidden Paths Kyoto books, the travel books that take you to the lesser known places in Kyoto, Japan. He's also a writer. He's written Paranormal Kansai and Paranormal Japan and other books as well. So he is a wealth of knowledge. He knows a lot about the history of Japan, especially in that Kyoto area, and he knows a lot of great spooky stories. He's a fantastic storyteller. So sit back and let's get to know a little bit more about Phillip Jackson. All right, here we are. We're back with another episode of the Just Japan podcast. And for the first time, I believe, on the Just Japan podcast is Phillip Jackson. Phillip, welcome to the podcast.
Hello, Kevin. Thanks for having me again. Yeah, we've done Supernatural Japan.
Yes, a couple of times.
Yeah, a couple of times.
Yeah.
Just Asia. And so Just Japan now, the Holy Trinity.
The Holy Trinity, that's right. So I've had Phillip on a couple of other podcasts that have done. One is permanently retired, Just Asia, but the Supernatural Japan, I keep hoping I'm going to find the time to get back to that one because the supernatural is something that's near and dear to my heart. I love all things spooky and creepy and kind of paranormal, and as I know you do too.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So since this is like the first time you've been on this specific podcast, which is the biggest of the three, there are people who may be familiar with you from the other podcasts I've done. But for those who are not, could you give us the kind of, a little bit about your background? I don't know why I'm having trouble talking right now. That's why I'm drinking a Monster Energy drink. If you could tell us a little bit about yourself, kind of a little intro, what you do, where you're based, and kind of how you found yourself in Japan doing the things that you do.
Yeah, sure. Well, I'm originally from the UK, from an area called North Lincolnshire. I spent a few years in London, which is where I met my wife, who's Japanese, which then brings in the Japan connection, how I got to Japan. Mm-hmm. So we lived in London, then spent a bit of time in Japan, back to the UK. And then as we became a family with children, we moved back to Japan back in 2012, settled. So we've been, for our second stint in Japan, for 12 going on 13 years now, settled here. Like many, when I first came to Japan, I became a teacher, English teacher. And then alongside that, I was writing for a magazine called Kansai Scene for about 14 years, feature articles, and I did the monthly music columns, music listings of
Oh, okay.
bands that were, So I would check which bands were coming to the Kansai area, interview some of the bands, and that was for about 14 years, and then COVID came, which meant there was no live music anymore.
Was that the death of Kansai scene? Was Kansai scene, or did that go away before that? Because I remember, like, when I first came to Japan in 2008, there was still Kansai Timeout was still a thing,
right?
And Kansai scene, and I would whenever I go to Osaka from Kobe, I would always, like, if I was somewhere, some kind of expat type place where they had a copy, I'd always grab a copy of both of them if I could. But I know Kansai Timeout, that faded away, I think, in maybe 2009 or 10, not long after I had arrived. I think. And Kansai Scene, what happened to that one?
Well, Kansai Scene was a monthly magazine, and then it was sold to a Tokyo company. There's a magazine in Tokyo called Metropolis or something like that.
Oh,
And then they bought it, and it became more of a advertisements magazine, and then they sold it to somebody else, and then that person decided to kind of get going with lots of articles again, and then they changed it to a every 3 months, and then they sort of made it bigger, but every 3 months. And that was just before COVID, and then COVID came, and that was the final nail in the coffin, which was a shame, because it was a really good magazine for a long time. A lot of, you had all your what's on things, entertainment, events, a cinema, and a live music, and it had feature articles which covered, real diverse genres of things going on in the area. Just before COVID, I was doing that, and I'd just been in talks with another Kyoto newspaper, which was called Enjoy Kyoto, which was just getting started. And they put the idea forward for me to do a Hidden Paths column. So that was just about to start, and then COVID came. So, you've got a copy of Hidden Paths.
Yes, I do.
I've got my copy here as well.
Yeah.
So I was, just before COVID, I was doing the Kansai Scene, and then looking at doing this other newspaper called Enjoy Kyoto, which would have really pushed the Hidden Paths criteria, which would have pushed the tour guide side of things as well. And then COVID came, tourism shut down, live music shut down, which meant those two publications shut down. And didn't come back after COVID, which meant I had to move back into teaching, which I've enjoyed anyway. I've done teaching in the UK and also in Japan. So that was my...
Well, I mean, I suppose, like, for anyone who, and by the way, folks, as we're going to get deeper into the weeds here, Phillip is a writer, and he's written quite a few books about Japan and stuff. We're going to get into that. That's where this is going. But I mean, like, we had on an episode of the Just Asia podcast, I interviewed my friend Sean Morrissey, who does the Dark Side of Seoul ghost tours and haunted tours in Seoul. And he does, like, these Korean cemetery tours and mountain tours. He's a fascinating guy, super knowledgeable about folklore, history in Korea, all these amazing things. And he kind of told the story in that podcast of how he actually got out of teaching for good, I think, like in 2008 or something. And then him and this friend had this company with doing these walking tours and travel guide work. But then COVID came.
It just killed so much. I mean, just down the road from where I am, there's a place called Teradaya, which there's a Japanese historical figure called Sakamoto Ryoma. And anybody who knows anything about the late 1800s and the Meiji Restoration and the change of rule from the Tokugawa shogun back to the emperor, Sakamoto Ryoma was very influential in that. So there's a place called Teradaya, which was basically an inn by the canal in Fushimi, where he used to stay. And just round the corner from there was a really nice, small souvenir shop, which was, every time I went down that area, I'd pop in and pick something up. But again, because of COVID, the tourism stopped, which meant there was no business for this souvenir shop. And that souvenir shop had been there years. And it's now a boxing gym.
Oh, okay.
The souvenir shop's gone because they just couldn't survive 2-3 years without any business.
Yeah. How do you pay rent? How do you pay the power bills when no one's coming in to buy your souvenirs? So Hidden Paths Kyoto. Let's talk about that. Phil has written a lot of great books. Paranormal Kansai, Paranormal Japan, Hidden Paths Kyoto. And I mean, I think when you first got on my radar, it was definitely through the Hidden Paths Kyoto. So can you tell us about what was behind writing that book and kind of what is based around and what inspired you to create this series?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I mean, I've always had an interest in history. Back in the UK, every week I'd be watching a TV show called Time Team, which I'm sure a lot of it is one of these archaeological shows where they would give themselves 3 days to dig up some area. Okay. And this 1 hour TV show would cover this 3 days. And it was actually introduced by Tony Robinson, who used to play Baldrick in the Blackadder UK comedy show. But that was a really, really popular archaeology show in the UK. Ran for about 20 years. Okay. So, I was always interested in history. When I lived in London, I wanted to know the history of where I was living there, in my hometown in North England, interested in the history of the area. So obviously when I came to Kyoto, okay, what's that? What's that statue? What happened here? And you quickly build up these little, pieces of the puzzle of how the city was built in some way. This person did this in the city at this time, and then that connected to that. And it's like stepping stones over the course of 1,000 years, how the city started to the point where it is today. And, you find little pieces of evidence left over, whether it's a katana sword blade cut on a bridge that's still there from 150 years ago, or, a stone wall that's the last remnant of a building that was there 500 years ago or something like that. Mm-hmm. And then you then start talking to people and realize how many people don't know any of this history. Whether they're a tourist who's just passing through and they've just picked up the, your mainstream guidebook that tells you to go to Kinkakuji and Kiyomizu-dera and Fushimi Inari Taisha, and that's it. Mm-hmm. Or whether it's somebody who's lived here their whole life, but they've just been busy with their life. Yeah. And they've never had that time to think about, okay, this street I walk down every day, what was happening on this street 200 years ago? Yeah. And there might be a little stone pillar in a corner almost hidden away. And you find out that the kanji on that pillar tells you that somebody was assassinated there in the 1600s. So I wanted to highlight some of these stories. And then, I like walking, I like hiking. So I thought, how can you put some of these into a walking route and connect them? And then somebody suggested putting them into a book form, and that's how it came about. And the first one was 2018. Okay, that was volume 1. It's up to volume 6 now, which was 2023, 22-23.
So, I mean, I'm curious. Like you've mentioned that like these are kind of historical routes that people can walk. And I know this. If you don't, we're going to give you all links to this later. But I mean, you can definitely go to hiddenpathskyoto.com to find out. more. But if you follow Phillip on social media, or on X or on your YouTube channel, it's very evident to see you enjoy walking, you enjoy hiking, you enjoy spending time in nature, in the forest. And now you're connecting that with that passion for history. Was the hiking part, the walking part, something you've always been drawn to?
Well, where I grew up as a child, it was in the countryside, North Lincolnshire. It was a village. So as kids, we were always playing in the farmers' fields, getting dirty, running around, being in woodland. And
sounds very much like my childhood. I grew up in a very small town in Canada, and it was the same thing. The forest was my playground, essentially.
And I grew up in that. As you get a little bit older, you start to get a little bit bored of that as you get into your late teens. And
absolutely, I think we all pine to get away. We all have dreams of the big city, right? We all want to get away. We all I mean, I desperately wanted to move to a city by the time I was in my teens. I was like, this place is so boring. There's nothing to do now.
and that's how I ended up in London in my mid-20s. But even when I was in London, I found that I was kind of drawn to places like, Hampstead and Highgate, where you've got Highgate Wood, Hampstead Heath. So you're in a city, but you can go for a walk in the forest in the city. So that kind of love of nature was always there. Getting to Kyoto later on, in my 30s, then, it's in a city surrounded by mountains.
Yeah.
So it's, where we're going to go for a walk. I tell you what, we'll go up the mountains.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. I found that same thing happen when I moved to Seoul, Korea, when I was in my mid-20s. I was there as an English teacher, and this bustling city of millions, but there's just all these mountains all throughout the city, very mountainous. So it was easy to hop on a subway, and just a few stops away, you could find yourself in a forest somewhere, which was always great. So, there's a few other books I want to talk about. Of course, we have Paranormal Kansai and Paranormal Japan. And so I guess a couple of things I want to know about. First of all, tell us about where your love of the spooky came from, all the paranormal things. And then tell us about these books. Because for all of you folks out there listening, I've read both. I love both. So I want Phillip to share these with you. So tell us about the paranormal journey.
Well, the paranormal journey, that started as a child. Okay. So I remember getting the book that everyone had, the Usborne Book of Ghosts and Spectres, which seemed to be in every school library. Not just the UK, but globally, I think.
The Usborne books are fantastic. Everything about like nature, like the Usborne book of like creepy crawlies and this and that, they're all fantastic.
And that book introduced me to the most haunted house in the UK, Borley Rectory. And I remember at elementary school, we had a book club where you could order books. You would get a leaflet every month or so, and you could order books and buy books. And I got a copy of Peter Underwood's Ghost Hunter's Handbook. And Peter Underwood was this ghost hunter who'd also investigated Borley Rectory. He'd been invited to join this society called the Ghost Club, which was started by another famous ghost hunter called Harry Price, who had also investigated Borley Rectory. And my brother and I, we sent a letter to Peter Underwood, this famous ghost hunter, saying that we were interested. We had his book. We were checking out a lot of empty old houses and farm buildings in our village. And he sent us a very nice letter back with a signed photograph. And I remember one of the quotes on his letter said something along the lines of, "Always look for the natural before looking for the supernatural." So that's something I've always borne in mind with that. But it was, those early books, the encouragement from somebody who had written a book which, as a child, that was fantastic. So that interest was there. And my brother and I, we just kept that interest, whether it started off with ghosts, and then it moved into the realms of UFOs, cryptid creatures and things like that. And I remember actually when I was about 12 years old, the village I lived in was close to the bank of the River Trent, which was not far from a RAF, Royal Air Force base.
Okay.
So we quite often get fighter jets doing low flying training along the river. So we was used to all these aircraft coming over, almost touching the tops of their houses, and we saw everything flying around. And there was one day I was looking out from the living room window, and my mother was there as well, and we both noticed over the river was this. It looked like a black ball. It was probably about 2 kilometers away, and it was just there in the sky. And we were used to all the aircraft coming over every day, so we could kind of judge the distance. Yeah. And we knew it was nothing that we'd seen before. We kind of judged the size of it. It wasn't small. It was actually quite big, but from 2 kilometers away. It was just this like a big black ball.
Okay.
And we watched it for a short while. It just hovered there in the air and then just gone, just disappeared like a blur horizontally off and was gone. It was like, that was strange. And whether it was a UFO, UAP, RAF secret machine or whatever, I don't know. It's definitely identified. But that then kind of, got me interested in that side of things. And then jumping many years forward to the Paranormal Kansai, writing the Hidden Paths books, you'd find out historical stories in Kyoto and Kansai area. And some of those stories would then have a ghost story attached to it, or a legend or a myth attached to it, or some unexplained story attached to it. And it was COVID that kind of kickstarted that, because I couldn't get out walking or hiking, but I wanted to do something. So I had all these paranormal stories. So I put the paranormal stories into the book Paranormal Kansai, put that out, and then later, I think actually it may well have been you who said, "Are you going to do another book?" And yeah, maybe. And I thought, well, I've kind of done Kansai. I can only stretch it out so far. So I thought the only thing I can do really is, go beyond the borders of Kansai. If anybody's listening who doesn't know what Kansai is, that's a collection of prefectures within sort of central West Japan: Kyoto, Osaka, Hyogo, Nara, Mie, Shiga, and Wakayama.
Yeah.
Wakayama.
That's it.
So that's this area called Kansai, which is a collection of counties, prefectures.
Yeah.
So Paranormal Japan went beyond those borders, and stories from across Japan, really.
Yeah. You were on previous episodes of the Supernatural Japan podcast. Talking about both books, and definitely I was encouraging you and cheerleading you to write more. This is great stuff. Yeah. I love this stuff. My father was a historian. I've always been interested in history. I've always been interested in folklore. Growing up in Eastern Canada, we have a lot of Irish and Scottish. There's a part of Canada that was really settled by Irish and Scottish immigrants who, brought over, their customs and their culture, and with that, their folklore and mythology and things like that as well. So it was quite well documented. And when I was in university, I used to love sitting in the library and borrowing books about Scottish folklore and Irish folklore, and how that melded into the local thing in Eastern Canada. And now I still love it. I love all the things like cryptids and, UFOs I'm kind of interested in too. I have had no experiences ever with, the closest thing to a UFO I've seen would be the International Space Station, I suppose, since I know what it was. And as cryptids, I've never seen anything. I've had a few wild boar a bit closer than I'd like, maybe. But I knew what they were. But I still find this really fascinating, and I'm always open to all the possibilities. So, with these books, and I mean, obviously, in 2024 or 2025 now, I suppose we're talking.
Yeah.
There is the idea of dark tourism, and there are people who travel all around the world to go to places that are, potentially haunted places or places where strange things have happened. So in many interesting ways, there's a connection with Hidden Paths Kyoto there too, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny you should say that, because during this winter break, I was thinking about, how 2025, what areas to focus on with the tours, because I've done a few tours this year with tourists, had tourists from the UK, Australia, America, Germany, and I've done tours where we've gone hiking around Uji, or a walk straight through the center of Kyoto City. And one idea that came to mind was, okay, how can I do a paranormal Kyoto tour?
Yeah.
And I think the best way, the idea I came up with was maybe similar to your friend in Korea, the dark side, not necessarily a ghost walk, but a dark side. Yeah. And there's one route that I kind of had in mind, which focuses a lot on the era of Toyotomi Hideyoshi, 16th century. So you have an area close to Kamogawa, the Kamo River, which goes through the center of the city, which was a place where a lot of Catholics were crucified and burned. And, some people say there's paranormal activity by the river from that. I haven't come across any specific stories, but, it's a place where a lot of executions and gory activities took place. And there's a commemoration stone by the river. You walk a little bit from there, and there's the tomb of when Toyotomi Hideyoshi invaded Korea.
Okay.
Around that time, it was the practice for samurai to bring back the head of their enemies to prove that they had made a kill, and they would be rewarded based on bringing back these heads. But obviously, outside the waters of Japan, you couldn't bring back all these heads, so they cut off the noses of their enemies and brought back the noses. And these noses were all buried in Kyoto. And now there's a large mound, almost like a tomb, which is where they're apparently all buried. But it's one of those locations that it's not advertised, even though it's easy access, and it's by the river. So that's one point. And then not far from there, it leads on to the tomb of Toyotomi Hideyoshi.
That's definitely like, that sounds like the stuff of a good dark tour. Yeah. I mean, there's those kind of stories and that kind of history is really fascinating. I think that definitely appeals to a lot of people.
And then just down there, you've got, from there, not far to walk, you've got the Kazan Tunnel, which has got sightings of a samurai ghost, which is thought to be Akechi Mitsuhide, who was killed by Toyotomi Hideyoshi's men, and also a headless motorcyclist. So there's quite a few things.
Wow, yeah. Well, I think, that's something you should put together and start advertising for sure.
So that's one idea for a new walk for 2025.
Cool. That's fantastic. That's neat. And that gets me to the top. I mean, I guess we're on the topic of kind of, I sent you some talking points just about your guiding. So as you can tell, everyone, from what we're talking about, Phil's also a guide who, you can hire and can take you around and share with you the history of Kyoto, of that area. Now, one thing I'm interested in talking to you about, I kind of know your thoughts on this, but I want to hear, the term over tourism is shared a lot about Japan, what's going on in Japan. And there's a lot of negative stuff that's constantly on social media of tourists misbehaving, tourists of all ages, and we know that, I believe they said by December of 2024, I think about 35 million inbound travelers had come to Japan. And next year they're hoping, the Japanese government's hoping for more to come. Now, when I follow your posts on X or your posts on Blue Sky, I see that often, you're in Kyoto, you're based in Kyoto, and you'll show photos of these beautiful places with no one around, and you'll sometimes kind of tongue-in-cheek say over tourism, huh? What are your thoughts on over tourism in Japan? And then, just how do you feel about this, and what do you see?
Yeah, one thing that's important to remember is Kyoto relies on tourism. Without the money from tourism, Kyoto is bankrupt. It's the number one economy for Kyoto. So, whether you're a visitor to Kyoto or whether you're a resident of Kyoto, you always have to remember that the city relies on the tourism trade. That's it. Over tourism, to me, is a myth. It doesn't exist in Kyoto.
Okay.
What the problem is, in my mind, is mismanaged tourism.
Everyone goes to the same place.
Yes, yeah. So you have a lot of people going to Kiyomizu-dera.
Yeah, and then they'll constantly show the shots of that street
they'll show the street which leads to street,
and they just show that same street in all the media, right? And they're like, look at Japan.
Even if you go to Kiyomizu-dera, you don't have to go by that street.
Yeah,
there are other routes that will get you there. But the thing is, you pick up a popular guidebook, and it has Kiyomizu-dera, Arashiyama, Fushimi Inari Taisha, Kinkakuji.
And that's basically it.
That's it. Yeah. I never recommend those places.
Yeah.
The latest volume of Hidden Paths books, volume 6, does have a walking route at Fushimi Inari Taisha, but it takes a different route to the red gates of the Senbon Tori. So if there is a place where somebody says, hey, I want to see that area because that's the place that everyone's talking about, then I'll say, okay, that's great. If it's your first time, I understand that, and it's a famous place. But go there. But also, why don't you try going there by this route, a different route, instead of the route that everyone's taking? Yeah. You can see, you can see the things that you see in the guidebook. But if you go by a different route, you'll get there where there's no crowds. But I was in center of Kyoto yesterday. We have some Japanese friends who live in the UK, and they were visiting, and they came to see us in Kyoto. And I think for their sons, it was their first time in Kyoto, and they said, we want them to feel the experience of Kyoto. So obviously hiking in the mountains outside of Kyoto was out of the question. So we went to Gion, and we went to Nijo Castle, and Gion was empty.
Yeah, I saw that in your photos on X.
Yeah, it was empty, and we wasn't there earlier in the morning. It was around 11:30, just before lunchtime. It was empty, but as we walked from Gion, as we left Gion, and then we needed to walk along Sanjo, which is like a main shopping street.
Yeah.
Where obviously you've got the road and you've got pedestrian areas, which are very narrow. those pedestrian areas were busy with people just walking from one place to another. But Gion itself was empty. It was almost deserted. And, we went and had lunch. There was a restaurant that we wanted to go to because it's got historical value, but there was a little queue, so we went and found somewhere else. But we didn't have any problem finding somewhere else. Okay. And then we went on to Nijo Castle, which again wasn't busy because it's spacious.
Yeah. Like I visited Nijo for the first time 2 summers ago. I mean, that was post-COVID, and it was fantastic. And there weren't many people around, and like you said, it's really spacious, very wide open.
Yeah.
And it was amazing, and I really enjoyed it. And I think my wife, it may have been her first time there as well, but it was a very different experience than that kind of walking up that road to Kiyomizu-dera, which we didn't do.
Because if you think about it, the road up to Kiyomizu-dera, it's very narrow.
Yeah.
So it doesn't take many people to make it crowded.
True.
And if you go up the Red Tori Gate Senbon Tori path up for Shimiyanari Taisha, it's very narrow.
Yeah.
So again, it doesn't take many people to make it crowded.
Yeah. True.
At Ashiyama, you've got the famous bridge. Again, it's narrow, so it doesn't take many people. So, you've got a lot of people cramped into a small area. So it's going to look very busy. I did see one negative sign. Somebody had written in English, "Go back to your own country," and "We don't want you bringing your rubbish here." It said signed a Kyoto resident, and they take that to a roadside barrier in the center of Kyoto. That's the only, obviously that's somebody who lives in the center of Kyoto.
Yeah.
Who only sees that busy area and has probably spent their whole life in Kyoto and, sees the empty times, the busy times, and has forgotten that without the tourism money, Kyoto is bankrupt.
That was one of the things that, I listened to on during the pandemic. I'm a huge consumer of podcasts. So, I listened to other podcasts about Japan. And that's one of the things that you'd hear these news stories talking about, how basically the city of Kyoto was going bankrupt during the pandemic because it relies almost exclusively on tourist dollars. And with the borders closed and, very little of those dollars, I mean, they're having trouble with all their infrastructure and how do we keep the buses running and the water running and repairing roads. We can't do this without, it doesn't have like an IT industry where they have companies like Intel or this or that, add to the tax base. And I think anywhere in the world, you're going to have those people who are that kind of the grumpy, get off my lawn, you kids kind of people. Right.
I mean, you've lived in the city. I've lived in London as well, and it's the same in London. London has really busy areas. You walk down Oxford Street on a Saturday afternoon, it's jam packed. But then if you go out to Highgate Village or the Hampstead Heath, you feel like you're in this wide open space of countryside, and it's picnics and dog walking.
Yeah, no, it's interesting, but it's so you do hear that over tourism, but it's just it's Tokyo, Osaka, Kyoto, and again, 2 years ago when we were 2 summers ago, the last time I was in Japan, and we were based in an area of Osaka called Tanimachi, which is kind of becoming more of a hip kind of hipster area, and there's a lot of young Japanese people who are kind of renovating old homes and turning them into cool businesses and shops and things. But I mean, it was a very quiet area, but if you walk 20 minutes, boom, then you're in Shinsaibashi, and it's just pandemonium, tourists all jammed into that Shinsaibashi arcade, the Shotengai, and again, they're all then leading up to funneling into Dotonbori, and they're just all in that one place. But not far away in any direction, all of a sudden, the tourists disappear. you know. And again, they've all got their guidebooks or they're on their phones, you know, and they're just kind of going where everyone else goes, right?
Well, basically, you've got to do your research. Either do your research if you want to do it on your own, or or get in touch with a guide such as myself.
Yeah. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about that. So first of all, before we talk about that, I know like you've got your Hidden Paths Kyoto Volume 6 book. You've got your Paranormal Kansai, Paranormal Japan. You wrote your book of short stories, Tengu, and I'm not sure it was a name. There was a story about a Tengu in there.
Yeah.
And I mean, and you recently started a YouTube channel. So what kind of creative projects do you have brewing at the moment, or do you have any plans for more in the near future?
A few ideas, like for the walking, is maybe branching out into the paranormal walking.
I suppose to do something like that, you have to really put a plan together and then kind of create the route. Do the research into all the different places along that route and the stories and the history to have so much to talk about. And then, because this is something I would love to do in the future. If I were to be based again somewhere in Japan, I don't know if the stars align someday and I can get back there. I would love to do something similar. Also,
I need to go back. As we said, Hidden Paths is up to Volume 6, but like you just mentioned, you go around and you get to know those areas. There's some routes from Hidden Paths Volume 1 from when it was written in 2018. There's been a lot of changes, partly from COVID.
Okay.
Some of the places are. Like that souvenir shop has closed down because in Volume 1, one of the walks was around that area, and that souvenir shop was mentioned in that walk, saying if you want to get souvenir, you can get from here.
But now it's a boxing gym.
Yeah.
So they can't do that.
So I need to go back and update them because also post-COVID, there's also some new cafes. New shops and things like that. Or as I've been walking around those areas, I've found new locations that I've missed before.
Okay.
That can either extend the walk or just something that I've missed along the route. So that's one thing I want to do this year is go back from Volume 1 and update those volumes to bring them up to date. So there's sort of like the paranormal walk, updating the volumes. I think that with the YouTube, I started putting a few of the paranormal videos up on there, places I've visited. So that YouTube channel is Paranormal Japan, and the other YouTube channel is Hidden Paths. Walking Historical Kyoto. That's where maybe some clips of podcasts or radio slots were on there. But I want to do some more updates on that. I have to be honest, I don't do so much on the YouTube. Like somebody said to me, you should walk around and do a video as you're walking around. Although I write the books and I enjoy talking about these places, I get embarrassed. If I'm talking to you one-to-one on a screen and we're in this room and it's fine. If I'm walking, I can't do that where I'm walking down the street holding a camera.
Yeah, I got you.
Walking away.
It's not for everyone.
I hear my voice, I cringe, I feel embarrassed.
Those people who vlog, like I do that.
I'm envious. I see your videos and I think, I wish I had the guts to do that.
That's like, that's what I used to do when I lived in Japan. I mean, that was kind of my style from my early days of YouTube, was that kind of thing, the walking vlogging, and that you kind of have to not give a crap.
I know what you mean.
People think, really, like, and then, but yeah, you just and then you just kind of learn that through practice, I suppose. It's like with anything. like with public speaking, you learn through practice. With that, it's just a matter of like just not caring what anyone thinks.
Yeah.
And I think when I was originally doing that, like back in 2008, 9, 10 for YouTube, like this was long before there was no YouTube Live or Instagram Live or TikTok Live. Like you just looked like a madman, like walking along talking to your phone, right? Like now so many people live stream and things like that it's maybe a little more normalized, but at the same time, I think it irritates people too, because there's a lot of live streamers who bring a bad name.
Yeah. When I used to do, as you know, I used to do some radio slots. Connected to paranormal side of things. So there was a radio show and a podcast show called The Unexplained with Howard Hughes in the UK. Sadly, the host Howard,
he just passed away last year.
Last autumn he passed away, totally unexpected in his late 50s. He was a great guy, really, really nice guy, a sort of champion of the genre.
Yeah, I've heard nothing but fantastic things.
Yeah.
I was listening to the Astonishing Legends podcast, kind of end of year Christmas bash, where they had all these really well-known people from the kind of paranormal genre of podcasting, and just everyone had just nothing but amazing things to say about him.
Yeah, really unexpected. So that was a big shock, because he was one of those guys who really popular, really well known within that genre, and you would go on to speak to him, and he would just make you feel like you was talking to a friend. Really professional guy. Yeah. But I used to listen to his radio show, and I'd occasionally send some, a comment or a story, and then, one day he sent me a message saying, if you've got some stories from Japan, I'd love to hear them. Do you want to come on the show? So I went on the show, and then after a couple of times, he said, I tell you what, we'll make you our Japan correspondent. So it was sort of, every couple of months, either I would send him a story and he'd say, great, we'll talk about that, come on. Or the producer would send me a message saying, hey, we heard about this. Do you know anything about it? I said, if I don't, I'll find out about it. And and there would just be, 5 minutes radio slots. But because it was the UK and the time difference, his radio show would be from 10 o'clock in the evening till midnight, which meant it was around 7 to 8 o'clock in the morning in Japan.
Oh, okay.
So I would be en route to my my day job. So I would have to set up in a park.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I'd have my iPhone on a stand, sitting in the park with some notes taped to the bottom of it.
Would that be the same park I interviewed you in?
It was, yeah.
Supernatural Japan podcast, the first time you came on.
Yeah, if anybody's listening to this, once it goes out, who knows Osaka, Utsubol Park, I would be sat there at 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning every couple of months, talking to a live audience in the UK or around the world, basically.
Yeah.
And, Howard used to laugh because although it was a radio show, we would have visuals. So he would see people walking behind me, walking their dog.
Yeah.
Or, he'd just say, oh, we're going to the park. I can hear the birds singing. And so, yeah, I used to feel, until I started talking to him, until the radio slot actually kicked in, I'd be sat there waiting, and people would walk past looking at me thinking, what's he doing? So I'd get that sense of embarrassment.
Nice. Oh, well,
maybe one day.
Yeah. Hey, I'm curious. I know I don't want to keep you too much longer, but let's talk bears for a moment. I almost forgot to ask you about this. So again, on your X, the last few days, I've been seeing a lot of fascinating evidence of bears using trees as scratching posts along your hiking route. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Yeah.
So that was on Friday. I went for a hike on Friday. I had a friend visiting from Australia who he used to live in Japan. So his wife's Japanese, so they regularly come back. So there was me and him and a friend of mine who is another expat resident of Kyoto. He's lived here years. Anyway, we were on top of one of the hills in Uji, Asahiyama. And we'd stop there to have a drink, and I'm feeding the birds. You put some seeds in your hand, the birds come down. And my friend comes over and says, I think I've seen a bit of a bear activity on a tree. So he took us over to this tree, this broken down tree. And some of the bark had been rubbed off. And he lives on Inariyama. So he's surrounded by monkeys and inoshishi, wild boar, all the time. And just a couple of days prior to that, there'd been 3 black bears sighted close to his house on Inari. Eek. So 3 bears together, which was a bit worrying. Which was only a couple. Yeah, the 3 bears, Goldilocks and the 3 bears. Yeah. So, 3 gaijins and 3 bears. So he said, I'm a little bit concerned. But anyway, we carried on our hike, and we walked for about another 50 meters, and we noticed another tree which had claw marks on it and ripped up. And we checked it, and it was fresh. It was sticky. So he said, maybe not today, but definitely within the last 24 hours. And then we walked about another 20 meters, another tree. And about every 20, 30 meters, there was another tree with really a lot of bark damage, claw marks, where it just been scratching away. And this went on for about between half a kilometer. And then my friend who lives on Inariyama, he's really good at spotting tracks and things like that. He's a really really outdoors person. And he said, look, if it was just one bear, I think it would stay clear. But if there's 3 bears, and 3 bears were spotted not far from here just a couple of days ago, he said, I'm a little bit concerned about that. And I said to him, what do you think? Should we turn back the way we came? And he said, no, I don't think that's a good idea, because we're below a ridge, and bears, if they're on a ridge above you, they could jump down on top of you. So he was really concerned. So he said, we need to get away from here, basically. So we go on to the Google Maps, and this part of Uji Hills, in between, there's a sort of a kind of a valley, and there's a farmland and a road going through. So we decided, okay, if we can get to there, at least we've got farmland, and there's a road, and there's buildings. Okay. So it's kind of relative safety. So we kind of hiked quickly, seeing more broken down trees and more bear activity. And we got to this road and got away from it. But it was concerning, because I've hiked that area a lot of times over a few years, and that's the first time I've ever seen any bear activity.
Well, it's maybe time to head to Mont Bell, and I think they sell bear spray now there.
Yeah.
Cool holsters for your belt, and have that bear spray on you.
But, somebody brought up a good point. Why are the bears coming? Obviously, the bear population is increasing for a number of reasons. The number of I got a couple of stats looking into it. So in 1975, there was over 500,000 hunters, licensed hunters in Japan, and 90% of those hunters were under 60 years old. In 2020, there was only about 200,000. So the number of hunters are 50% lower, and that figure of percentage under 60 years had gone down to 40%. So basically, the number of licensed hunters over a 45-year period has halved, and those hunters have got old.
And they're much older. They're old men.
Yeah. Oh, wow. So there's less hunting. The government have put more restrictions on hunting, and agriculture always used to be a barrier between the wilderness and civilization. residential areas. And a lot of that farmland is now abandoned because the farmers have got old.
Yeah.
The younger generation
That's the thing I've heard about because of that depopulation of the countryside, where we hear, like in the last episode of the Just Japan podcast, I interviewed Danny and Evan Benton from the Benton Homestead in Omishima, and like it's all about renovating Akiya. And the reason why there are so many Akiya is because of the depopulation of the countryside. And with that, basically nature's reclaiming all those farmlands and stuff. And then now all of a sudden those borders are gone for the bears, right?
Yeah, there used to be a buffer zone, but it's disappearing.
It was all over the news just recently where a bear had found its way into someone's home and was hiding under its kotatsu, right?
Yeah, under its
kotatsu. I saw that all over the news.
You can't blame it. You can't blame it.
I mean, we watch the Japanese news here, you know. My wife's like, look at that. You know, the hunters are outside and all the police. And they were showing the 3D recreation where it had its head under the kotatsu. That's cool,
it's quite
man.
A funny story.
Yeah. You know what? I'm curious. We can wrap things up because it is after 9 where you are, and we're both back to work tomorrow. Where can people find you online if they want to, and if they want to, inquire about you guiding them in Kyoto? How can they contact you, and where can they find the things that you do?
Well, the main website is one you mentioned earlier, hiddenpathskyoto.com.
Okay.
Which has got details on the books and the walks, and you can contact through there. The YouTube channels, Hidden Paths, Walking Historical Kyoto, Paranormal Japan, and on X, P Jackson
Music.
P Jackson Music, yeah.
P Jackson Music, yeah.
And on Blue Sky, it could be P Jackson Music as well.
Probably. I don't have that handy, but yeah.
Yeah, it could be a similar thing. Because playing guitar is another thing that's a big thing in my life as well.
Nice. I can see a whole bunch of them behind you.
Yeah. I've got a few. There's 11 guitars behind here.
Wow.
Gibsons and Jacksons and Flying V's and Les Pauls and Strats and acoustics.
Nice. Well, Philip, thank you so much for joining us on the Just Japan podcast for the first time, but definitely not the first time you've been on a podcast with me. Really appreciate it. And for everyone listening, those links will be all in the show notes, and I'll share them around. So thank you.
Thank you for having me again, Kevin. Always a pleasure.
Well, there you go. Thank you so much, Philip, for coming on the Just Japan podcast for the first time. That was great to catch up with you and get to know you more. And for all you amazing people out there listening, your chance to learn about Phillip Jackson. So if he wasn't already on your radar, now he is. So please go to hiddenpathskyoto.com. Go check out his website. I'll put links in the show notes to all of his socials. He's very active on X. He's active on Blue Sky. Go check him out. Go check out his YouTube channel. There will be links to all of these places. Go buy his books on Amazon. And if you are in the Kyoto area of Japan in the near future and you are looking for a fantastic personal guide or someone to guide a group of your friends around who knows a lot about history, but especially the kind of darker side of history, the spookier side of history, as someone who can show you hiking trails and really amazing things that most tourists never see in Kyoto, get in contact with Philip. You will not be disappointed. You will not be disappointed. So go check that out. And again, follow him on all of his socials. I will put all of the links for Philip in the show notes as well. And I'll also share them on my social media platforms. Well, that does it, folks, for episode 233 of the Just Japan podcast. My name is Kevin O'Shea, and I'm glad you tuned in. Again, it's great to have you. And I just want to thank you all for listening. Please help the show grow. You can do that by telling a friend about the podcast. Word of mouth is the best way for a podcast like ours that is relatively small to grow. Tell a friend, tell 2 friends who you think would like this kind of content, and then hopefully they'll go on and tell 2 people each as well. Help us grow that way. Leave a rating and a comment as well. That would be much appreciated. And like I mentioned at the top of the podcast, the Supernatural Japan podcast is back. New episodes have recently dropped. A new one dropped just this weekend. So go check that out. Wherever you listen to podcasts, I would love to have more people come on over to that podcast. Oh, that one's near and dear to my heart. I love making it. So yeah, and it's going to be pretty consistent moving forward. So go check that out. All right, well, that does it, folks, for another episode of the podcast. Follow me on social media. All the links are below. Follow me on Instagram, on Blue Sky, on X. Join the Facebook group or the Facebook page. All those places. Look for me, of course, on YouTube as well at Busan Kevin. I'm becoming more and more active on YouTube at Busan Kevin. I've been putting up some pretty long vlogs recently. A lot of shorts too. Shorts too. I've been putting up a lot of shorts as well. You can see one I just put up yesterday from my arm wrestling club here in Malaysia. That's right. I'm an arm wrestler now. Believe it or not, what a weird hobby to have, but it's a hobby that's a lot of fun and keeps you fit. All right, folks. Well, that's it. Thanks for listening, wherever you are in the world. I hope you're happy. I hope you're healthy, and I'll be talking to you very soon.
If you got a minute to spare,